artifact collection is in the thousands. And actually, by the early 2000s, he had collected over 3,000 and stopped counting. That was nearly 20 years ago. This book reveals what was found, where it was found, and this is very important. This book also describes and shows how that affects the traditional Sand Creek story. One of the things about this book, it includes information about Sand Creek that has never been made available to the public before. This book is eye-opening.
We had it narrowed down where this could be anywhere on our ranch, which was 7 miles of Sand Creek and a mile either side of Sand Creek. So that's 14 square miles. And so here you are using something this big and trying to scan, 14 square miles with this thing right there.
Our book is not only filled with eyewitness accounts that we cite very well, it's about a first-hand account of discovery. We're interested in truth. One of the reasons why we wrote this book is we're interested in getting the truth out. So much about what's in this book has been suppressed. They've been lied about, they've been minimized, they've been promised credit for discovery.
I've been going with Chuck metal detecting about 20 plus years. And I personally have found quite a few things I love because Michael went over everything that we find. Chuck takes a picture of it and he GPSes it, he plots it. So I don't know how people can argue when they say the battle was at one spot when in reality we find so many things. We're leaving Lamar, we're going out there, and on Chuck's dash is this heavy, well, this is it right here. This heavy little thing right here. What on earth is this thing? It weighs a lot. He proceeded to tell me this is the actual cannonball itself. About 100 yards from where we were, Chuck said, "See that stake out there? See that green stake?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, that's where I found this thing. I'm metal detecting. For once in my life, I knew what I got. I found this puppy. This is the same thing that Chuck had. It was at least a football field away from where Chuck found his. We're in the pickup, we're tired, we're hot. "Chuck, where's that piece I found?" He gives it to me. I get the one on the dash, and I'm fooling around with it, and they fit, they match. These are the actual ones. I was amazed.
This is Mike, and he wrote the book. We found the lost Sand Creek site.
This book goes into detail on my mom and dad's discovery of their lost Sand Creek site, where they found over 4,000 Sand Creek artifacts. We're talking about arrowheads, bullets, cannonball shell fragments, kettle fragments. This discovery goes into kind of where things were found. The location of where artifacts was found does really provide clarity on where things happened and how things happened. Additionally, we're told that the warriors were not in the camp, they were off hunting. But according to George Bent, that's not the case. There were warriors in the camp, including himself. And also we find through eyewitness accounts, there was a soldier killed in a very gruesome way at Sand Creek. His name was Robert McFarland. He actually had his gun jammed inside of his chest. We've learned about Sand Creek, you cannot paint it with a broad brush. There's a lot that happened, and we're transparent with our book. There's a man named Lieutenant Bonsall that went out to the site, and he measured the distance of the camp. You can see on this map, there's what's called Three Forks, and then here is his camp number 2, and in between here is 6 miles from his camp to Three Forks, and then in between here is where the length of what he measured for the village. This Three Forks is a very important reference point, so we measure back from that as well. Dad was able to get a hold of, in the early 1990s, old 1930s aerial maps. And when he looked at these maps, he immediately spotted a place called Three Forks. And so this is the spot you can measure down, because again, Bonsall measured down from there to his camp number 2 is 6 miles. Well, in between there, you can see between camp number 2
there's a pinpoint at the very bottom, and you can measure in there, and we have in there the length of the village of where some of this fighting took place, the length of the village. But it measures out to be, when you measure down 6 miles from Three Forks, this actually lines up with this happening on the Bowen family ranch. What we learned about with Sand Creek, all of our conclusions are based firstly on artifacts, and then also based on eyewitness accounts which line up with where artifacts were found. They get some clues from Irving Halbert, and in 1908 he said this: "At daylight in the morning, the command was 40 miles away from the fort. Just as the sun came up, the command reached the top of a ridge overlooking the valley of the Big Sandy, from which point a large Indian village could be seen scattered along the north bank of the stream about 3 miles away." So according to Halbert, they needed to locate a ridge where you can see a northern bank about 3 miles up the creek. There had to be a good view of this northern bank from this ridge. And the thing that, with every single find that Dad found, every artifact, got a GPS coordinate and a photo. So this is very meticulously documented. Right here, Dad bought, I can't even count how many of these Rubbermaid stacking slides, and they're just filled. There's at least 50 of these things in one of them, and they're filled. He's got a gun safe in his basement that's just filled top to bottom with these things. And you can see how he documented. He's got the date collected, the item, he's got the latitude, the longitude, GPS accuracy. This is as meticulous of a documentation of any discovery. If there was a court proceeding, what would be more important, hearsay evidence or physical evidence? Physical evidence. It's very difficult for hearsay evidence to even be admitted in court because it's very hard to verify. We share in our book from George Bent's letters about how Little Bear, he was one of the Cheyenne warriors, and he got up early that morning of November 29, 1864. He went up across a high hill that morning to go get his pony. Well, he looked south toward the lodgepole trail, and what he noticed when he looked south was he saw a long black line. So he knew at that moment, this is from George Bent, he wasn't a soldier. We know from George Bent's letters, they saw those soldiers miles away. Butch Kelly visited a month later to look at bullets and other artifacts I found. Butch is a local historian and an Indian Wars cavalry reenactor. He portrayed a soldier in Son of the Morning Star, a TV miniseries about George Custer and events prior to the Little Bighorn. He looked at a cavalry carbine swivel from a carbine belt, some spurs, a bit, and 3 or 4 things that could be identified as military, he said. "Is there anything else?" Butch said after looking at hundreds of artifacts. "Wasn't this enough? What more could he want? I had some 5-gallon buckets full of things like barbed wire, fence staples, round nails, and even a hubcap from a Model T Ford." Well, there was the piece of cast iron on the dash of my pickup. It didn't seem worth mentioning. I thought about putting it in my bucket of junk, but I didn't know for sure what it was, so there it stayed, and it sometimes bounced awkwardly, hitting the windshield. I went to get it. There were some threads in it that could have had something like a pipe screwed in it. I handed it to him, thinking it was worthless. "Do you know what this is?" I had to admit that I didn't. I thought it could be a broken piece of a windmill weight. The old windmills had counterbalance weights instead of tails that are common on them today. Some of the early weights were ornamental and looked like barnyard animals like horses, pigs, or cows. Some were just simple round balls. Perhaps the threads were where it screwed into the windmill. "I'll tell you what this is." He straightened his shoulders and looked directly into my eyes. I was not prepared for what he would say next. Now you're going to have to read the book to get the rest of that.